Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St Pierre.
Welcome to the Health Oddity podcast, episode number 14. My name's Paul Bassett, and I'm here with my other two hosts, James St Pierre. Say hey.
Hey.
And Peter Lant. Say hey.
Hey.
Hey. Okay. And I'm also here with a very special guest, someone I've worked with very closely. We have Chris Lowe, and he's here from Chris Lowe Nutrition. He's an excellent nutritionist, and not only that, does he work with some of the best athletes out there. He's in resident at WASPs Rugby Club. So any of you know UK rugby, then you will know that WASPs are a formidable team, and Chris works to help with their nutrition, to make sure they recover, to make sure that they're as strong as possible on match day, and also that they recover between matches and they can train hard, not only on season, off season. And myself and Chris have been working together, my own individual needs. I've come to him as a personal trainer, someone who's got his own athletic goals. And for a variety of reasons, I approached Chris to help me optimize my training. It was a recommendation through another great trainer called Fionn, who runs a gym in Belfast called Virtue, who's a kettlebell sport athlete. Not only was he amateur world champion, he's now turned professional. And he is an absolute beast. He's an absolute animal and a real inspiration for anyone who's into kettlebells. But he was working with Chris to really take him to the next level. He'd been working with the same coach that I do, which is Paul McElroy. And in tandem, based on the programming of Paul and working with Chris to make sure that he could actually do the workouts and make the weight he wanted, he's gone through such a transformation from when I first met him to being one hell of an athlete. But one of the reasons I wanted to get Chris on the podcast is Chris is an awesome bloke. So I thought I'd just say, Chris, how are you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on board today. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you very much.
No worries. So, trust me, this is probably the shortest introduction because we did have a rather interesting pre-introduction, which is hopefully not going to be included in the podcast. But so one of the reasons I reached out to Chris was that I'm a 40-year-old guy. I have two kids. I have a very busy job. I've not come from an athletic background, but I am incredibly interested in health and fitness, and I've been on my own journey over the number of years that led me to become a personal trainer. But one of the things I really didn't know how to do was make the jump into a more performance-based goal. I'd been working out and training with focus, don't get me wrong. I wanted to reduce my level of injuries, drop my body fat. I wanted to get stronger. I wanted to be a better version of myself. But I was really struggling with my energy levels when I was training because I was just ramping everything up. And, you know, when you get to 40, you start to notice anything you don't optimize. And as much as I was knowledgeable, I'm not always the best judge of my own progress. It's one of the reasons I work with the coach, and it's one of the reasons I approached Chris, and Fionn recommended him because he was getting such good results. So, Chris, before we go into detail, we can keep kind of chatting about, you know, how we're working together and stuff like that. And I know Peter and James have got loads of questions for you. What do you generally, what kind of areas do you generally work in, and what's your kind of expertise? And I suppose, how does that fit into working with someone like myself, who's more general population rather than the kind of elite athletes that you work with most of the time?
So I guess my typical sort of avatar or population that I work with would be, yes, athletes. So I guess when I started out, say after my university degrees, sort of starting your own business, essentially you don't really have any clients and you essentially just take everybody on, don't you? So I've worked with basically a lot of general population, and now as I sort of progress through my career, it could be just for far more in line with like my values and who I want to actually work with, and as essentially elite athletes and essentially anybody who's looking to really just drive their performance and take their performance to the next level. So ultimately my job is to make sure that their performance, their body composition is not a rate limiting factor. So when you look at athlete support system, yes, you've got the strength and conditioning, you've got the skill stuff, you've got the stuff that actually makes them good at this sport, the psychological component, the nutrition component, everything. There's loads of things that go into making an athlete great. And obviously one of them is nutrition, like mentioned. And I just make sure that my area is not rate limiting. And if everybody does their part, and then that just makes the athlete or the team the best that they can be, essentially.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because you work with people basically, and people, whether they're an elite athlete or just a more focused individual who's not professional, you're having to manage some very, very interesting metrics and advise people on how to optimize nutrition and also how to optimize other areas. We've had lots of conversations about stress and sleep and things like that. That most people don't realize they need to bring the same focus to that they do to their programming. Most people go, right, I've got this lovely little program, I'm going to follow this, the weight's going to go up every week. And then they don't realize the implications of higher intensity, more volume, more frequency and things like that. And then, you really do think at every level about what the implications would be in terms of your diet.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when we think of like the key principles of performance-based nutrition, it's meet the body's demands and fuel for the work required. So essentially, the greater the demand, the more we need to put emphasis on nutrition to make sure we can somewhat maintain homeostasis and drive performance. So we know that if there's too much of a mismatch in terms of your intake and expenditure, you can have a massive drop off in performance because essentially the tanks are running empty. And then when you combine that with lots of lifestyle factors as well, stress, work, family, travel, and everything else in between, it's very difficult at times to adhere to the nutrition principles. So I guess like my job then is to make sure, yes, we're not just looking at the nutrition, but looking at the whole lifestyle factors as well, which then enables you to adhere to the nutrition principles. It's like you can know exactly what you're doing, but if you're stressed up to the eyeballs and you got literally no time for yourself, you're not sleeping well, the last thing you want to do is find the time and energy to put into your nutrition. So like I've mentioned to you quite a few times, is always looking at protecting your energy, like serve yourself first so you can serve others better. So even if you are really stressed up to the eyes again, like I was saying, really running out of time, if you just find that 20-30 minutes to cook your food, get everything done, and therefore you're meeting the body's demands, that puts you in such a far better place then to do extremely well with your training. And we know then that just creates that momentum. So if you don't get your lifestyle right, you don't get your nutrition right, you don't get your training right, and then that's just a vicious cycle. And then when you have to turn up and be at your best to work with your clients, you can't be like dragging your feet, you can't be a miserable asshole or anything. So you have to be making sure that every area is on point. And from my perspective, the lifestyle is a huge area that impacts the nutrition, that impacts the training then.
Well, I've had two major kind of things that kind of happened during working with you. Within the first 2 weeks, my wife broke her humerus right at the top, and that meant she couldn't use her arm at all. She can work, she couldn't look after the kids, couldn't do anything like that. And that happened, it took about 2 months recovery. And so I'd only just started working with you, still training, still trying to eat well. And I knew very early on that if I didn't eat properly, then I wasn't going to be able to do my job, because I had to run the studio. It just opened after the first lockdown. I was doing crazy hours, like 60 hours a week. I was training 5 days a week, and I was obviously looking after the kids as well and cooking all the meals and all that stuff. And I kind of knew I needed a plan. I needed to know what I needed to eat. I needed to know what I had in the shopping. And it made a massive difference just to my psychological place, because I think if I hadn't had that focus, it could have been all over the place. So, I mean, and then my finger as well. I won't go on about my finger. I've been going on about it for ages. But obviously I had an operation. So you worked with me on like what my nutrition would be post-op, because you're working with athletes who come through so many different events. They've got a peak performance at times when they've got to be on their best, we'll say like some major match or whatever. And you've got people who've come out of an injury from a match, or people who are looking to drop weight whilst preparing for fights and things like that. So you've got such a complex set of needs there. What makes a client an elite athlete versus someone else?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. In terms of I
Well, in
think in
terms
terms of
of
their characteristics, it would be a case of, they have just like this massive goal that they need to be, that's perhaps even bigger than themselves, that they're driving to achieve essentially. And they know that to achieve this big goal, they got a huge amount of demands placed on the body. And with that, then it's almost a case of their thought process, like, how am I going to get to this next level? What area of my performance do I need to look at to upskill? Is it the mindset side of stuff? Is it the nutrition? Is it the skill? So I think that perhaps that kind of that growth kind of mindset perhaps is really important for elite athletes to make sure they're ticking all the boxes and not leaving anything on the table. Where if you say, for example, general population, it is a case of their demands are far fewer. And therefore their basic kind of nutrition plan and principles can be far more simplistic, and there's going to be far less trade-offs. So I think when you get up, go from say amateur to sub elite to elite level, you just got more sort of trade-offs to sort of play around with, and it's more of a case of just how can we negate these compromises as best as possible in terms of, yes, performance, recovery, immune function, energy levels, freshness, fatigue, sleep, all that kind of stuff. So they just have a far greater emphasis on these different areas. So say, for example, if you've got a general population, they go, a client that goes to gym 3 to 5 times a week, they might do some cross trainer, they might do some like tricep kickbacks, all that kind of sort of general gym go type stuff. Their physiological demands aren't really that big. And if they have 5 hours of sleep per night, it's not going to impact their performance that much. But if I got elite level athletes who train 2 to 3 times a day, they got important meetings, they got a lot of traveling to do as well, and with that and a lot of stress and pressure as well, and they're sleeping 5 hours a night, their diet is no point, they're going to dig themselves in a massive hole. And then when they need to be at their best, they can't do. So essentially, I guess as you go up through the levels, you just have to be far more on top of your nutrition, because the compromises are going to be far greater and the consequences are going to be greater.
So what would a general population person and an athlete share in terms of their nutrition? What would be the pillars that they would share, that you would work with both populations on?
Yeah, fantastic question. So ultimately, like, athletes are people first, so they still have the same issues. So if you take away all the performance side of things, or like the duties of like media, all that kind of stuff, they still have the normal life to live. They still have the same stresses. They might have a young family. They still have traveling. They still need to cook, all that kind of stuff. So they do have those shared like commonalities for sure. But the only difference really is from an elite perspective, or as your training demands increase, it just makes sure you are fueling for that accordingly. So there's going to be a far greater emphasis on carbohydrates and hydration essentially. So if you like pull their diets back to the basic minimums, you're still looking at portion sizes. Calorie control is still extremely important. Food quality is still very important. Perhaps having a higher protein diet is going to be important as well. And then on top of that, then it's very much dependent on the demands of that day. If someone's doing a 30-minute sort of bike ride, they're not really going to have that much of a demand. They don't need the fuel for it. They don't need that many carbohydrates. They're not going to get that dehydrated. But if they got, 2 to 3 big sessions a day with a large scale component in there as well, is like, okay, there's now far greater emphasis on carbohydrates, far greater emphasis on hydration, nutrient timing, certain supplements that can really just propel them and make sure that their fueling is on point, they're recovering a lot faster. And ultimately, they are going from day to day without any sort of detriments in their performance. So I know a lot of individuals with high training demands, they might start the week Monday, Tuesday feeling pretty fresh, and then towards the end of the week, they will fade. They can't maintain this high work rate because they're not recovering on a daily basis. And that essentially due to the depletion of energy stores, either in the big calorie deficit, glycogen depletion, or they're just dehydrated. So for an elite athlete, they just got to be able to meet the body demands on a daily basis, fuel for that work required, and therefore they can maintain work capacity throughout the week. A lot of elite athletes, they need to be at their best on the weekend, and usually they feel like absolute shit going into it if they're not eating enough. So it's really my job to make sure, again, they eat enough on a daily basis based on what they have. So many elite athletes will have different types of days, low days, medium days, high days. They can have different demands. So therefore, we need to have different amounts of food and carbohydrates to help meet those demands. General population, they're probably if they do like a gym session, if they did a cross trainer, they did like a walk, generally speaking, the demands are pretty low and they could just eat the same amount of food every single day. And all they have to do is just meet their preferences, really, assume that the weekly calorie intake is in check. But then when you look at that elite athlete, they got more things to focus on, just to make sure they're on point with everything.
What would you say is the kind of percentage difference in getting the nutrition right and not right? Because I kind of tend to think back to 20, 30 years ago when even elite sport, there wasn't really the focus on nutrition and things, was there? You know, like elite rugby players and footballers in the 70s and the 80s probably wouldn't have, you know, would have led fairly normal lives without such a focus on the science behind nutrition. But what kind of percentage benefit or gain do you think having the nutrition right gives the actual performance of the athlete?
Yeah, a very, very difficult one to say. But what I can say is this really cool quote of, you know, I'm going to butcher this completely. You know, a good diet won't make an average athlete elite, but a poor diet will make an elite athlete average. So what we're trying to do from a nutrition perspective is trying to, you know, take them to that next level in terms of their fuel and their performance so they can express their skill set as best as possible. Because if you take the best rugby player in the world and don't give him any carbohydrates, put him in a massively depleted state, he or she will fade off the face of the earth. Like both their physical and mental capacity will drop significantly. And you see this just in games, if someone hasn't got the nutrition right, like based on their training load throughout the week, they're going to be fit enough to withstand an 80-minute rugby game and 90-minute football match. They are going to be 100%. But if you see them sort of fading towards the end, making silly handling errors, the passing accuracy, the passing speed going down, that is most likely down to depletion of carbohydrate stores or dehydration, because again, that affects them both mind and body. So it's going to be extremely hard to put a percentage on it. But it will be significant for sure. And if you wind back 20, 30 years, especially with rugby, like it wasn't professional then, and everyone would have like the normal sort of 9-to-5 jobs, for sure. And in terms of the research as well, it hasn't really, I think sports science research really in nutrition anyway, kind of kicked up a gear maybe in the last sort of 20 to 30 years. And that's why you see everything taking another level now. Like my role in terms of professional sport didn't exist 15 years ago, really. Is only a case now that, you know, people have seen the value of this with the research coming through, and therefore they've started employing individuals like myself to come in and work either full-time, part-time or contract with professional teams, because they see the value there for sure.
Because I suppose every year almost, or every decade, you know, things move on, don't they, in terms of, you know, in athletics, you know, people are running faster or throwing things further, or, you know, and the human body isn't evolving that quickly. So it is down to these, you know, these tweaking of, I suppose, the, you know, the nutrition and the training principles and the whole team that's built around the athlete and the sports now with the psychology as well. So I suppose if they did have, it's interesting, isn't it? Because like you say, this role that you're doing now 20 or 30 years ago wouldn't have existed, would it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I said, "Oh, can I help you with your nutrition?" They'd be like, "What's nutrition?" Like, I just want to get a few pints in me and crack on and play a game. Like,
what do you see, like, based on sort of like how I train people, and then maybe how the other guys do as well, doing like, you know, some group sessions and stuff like that. What difference do you see in your athletes, say, between those who play a team sport? Because you said something about playing the thing, you know, the thing that they're trying to achieve is bigger than themselves. So in a team sport, that is, you're not just you're everybody, right? What differences do you see between that and someone who does like an individual sport? So they're just like Finn, who's on a platform on his own, and he's just got to, I mean, I know they go there with the team from Ireland and all that, but when he's performing, he's on that platform on his own, and he's like, right, I've just got to nail this myself. You know, so how, like, well, what's the major difference between that and basing that on how general population trains, say, if you go down the gym on your own or you do whatever, as opposed to training in like a group session with somebody, you know, with like a common type of goal?
I think it comes down to having target and specificity with things. So, say, for example, if you're a weightlifter and you know what your numbers are in training and you want to hit a certain number in competition, you know, everything's very geared and very direct to that in terms of the planning side of things. And therefore, all like the distractions that could happen on distractions because they're so focused on one goal. Where, say, for example, if you're just going to the gym, you can kind of get pulled away like, oh, I'm going to do a little bit of bench today. I might go and jump on a watt bike. I might do this. Like they don't have specificity and therefore they get pulled pillar to post and don't really make any direction there. But if you are like a high level athlete or you're just looking to really progress, you definitely have a clear outcome, the goal, and you got your GPS coordinates to get there. So it's like, right, if I'm at point A and I need to get a point B, what does that road look like, both from the training, the nutrition, and everything in between? So I think that would probably be a big thing. Like even in the team sports, even in rugby, like each and individual player will have their individual like development plan, their IDP. So even though they're in a team environment, it's like, right, how can I still be the best I can be to benefit the team as a whole? So they have that, where that then is like their performance, their recovery, their body composition. Do they need to build muscle? Do they need to drop body fat? Is a case of, right, you're getting ill a little bit too frequently, like upper respiratory infections. We need to look at combating that, some lifestyle stuff around there. Are you deficient in anything? So I think whether you're like in a solo sport or whether in a team sport, you're still looking to get the best out of yourself. And that's having one clear kind of outcome. So like say a rugby player, I need to be 115 kilos with body fat at X. That is probably going to put me in the best physical position to be the best in my position, in my sport. So I think, yeah, specificity is a huge thing. General population, they probably don't have this specific, like hard kind of numbered based goal. It's a case of, I want to drop body fat. I want to get leaner. I want to look good. It's a bit more subjective in terms of the outcome. In terms of objective, it's like, right, if you're a rugby player and you want to be 115 kilos at 10% body fat, these like hard numbers we can work off. But then general population perhaps don't have that, perhaps.
I suppose they have the your team players and your individual sports guys will have, they've got the goal, but they've got the why behind the goal as well, haven't they? So it's like, if I don't perform, I get dropped and I'll lose my career, or I end up playing for a lesser team. And if I don't perform, I don't win, and I don't get to go to nationals and world championships and all that sort of stuff. So bringing that back to general population is right. You can have that goal, but why do you want it? That's the thing, isn't it? And then they haven't got like, well, I'm not going to lose my job if I don't lose weight or whatever. So they've got to have that specific. It's not necessarily a specific target weight or anything like that, but a specific reason of why they want to lose it, and then eventually they'll be able to do it, no problem. It becomes a non-issue, I suppose.
It kind of comes onto a question I was going to ask, which is because of the why is so specific with an elite athlete. When I work with my clients, and I'm sure the same with Peter and James, is, sometimes we just want to drop weight or fat, and kind of like you can make massive drops in weight. I've got programs where people will lose 7 or 8 kilos in a month, and it doesn't seem to affect anything other than make them feel great. Whereas when I've cut and maintain my numbers, because I train as an individual, I know my numbers, I can see everything on paper, and I see how I perform to the numbers. One of the reasons I came to you, Chris, is I dropped that fast. God, everything tanks literally. And it's great. I've lost 2 kilos in 2 weeks or whatever, but then my performance just goes boom. Whereas a lot of my clients, because each workout is slightly different, they're maybe not consistently training every day, and they're maybe doing 2, maybe 3 times a week. They can drop weight quite quickly and not see any negative impacts into life. And if anything, they can see positive impacts of just being lighter, fitting in their clothes, confidence and all that. But what I noticed, when you add performance into there, which is an element that most people don't think about, they think about how hard they work, but not how they performed. God, you really notice with nutrition when you get that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you think of just like the nutrition side of things more specifically, yes, I kind of mentioned that energy balance is really important. So your portion sizes, general population can, if you think of the hierarchy of needs, they could just think of like calories and then food quality and perhaps higher protein, and they'll pretty much just hit all their goals absolutely fine. But with elite athletes or anybody with high training demands, they need to be more specific. So it'd be like, yes, calories are still really important. Protein is going to be essential to have with every meal to drive adaptation, muscle remodeling, and repair. Then it's like, okay, with remaining calories, then we need to be following a higher carbohydrate approach and perhaps a lower fat approach. just so we can maximize, yes, performance and fuel and recovery and so on. Where general population, like their macronutrient ratios don't really mean anything, because the demands aren't there. You know, they're not going to reach those levels of depletion where they need to follow a high carbohydrate intake. Their personal preferences are going to drive a lot of things here. So if they want to have 2,000 calories of high carb, low fat, or 2,000 calories of a ketogenic diet, or vice versa, whatever is the most important one for them, that's going to make their approach sustainable, that they could do for a long period of time based on their enjoyment and, like I said, their social life, the preferences and so on. But elite athletes, they need to be following this high carb, low fat approach, just because we know that they're going to get large levels of depletion in each training session. And if they don't have enough carbs there, that accumulation of fatigue will add up throughout the week. And this is why they tend to like just tank on the weekend or towards the back end of the week. Yeah. So they just,
I was just passing out at the weekend before I worked with you. I was just so knackered. I would just be like, sitting on the couch doing nothing because I had nothing in the tank.
Yeah, and then if at the weekend you had to go out and play if that was the most important time, you had to go out and play your big game on the Saturday or the Sunday or whatever. That's that's massive, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, this is I saw this on your website. I had a look at your website actually, Chris. And there was one of the articles I looked at which was about the carb depletion in the muscles, like for performance that athletes struggle with. And this is what happens with people when they go like, right, well, I haven't done any exercise for 20 years. I'm going to run a half marathon and go low carb at the same time, and this and that, and cut my calories and do it, and they do everything at once. And then they wonder why I did that years ago. I lost loads of weight and I looked ridiculous and I did a half marathon, but then I was knackered at the end. Like basically after 3 months of training and everything and then doing it, I was just screwed. I was an absolute mess. So all I do is go, right, I need to eat more now. So I just eat loads and put it all back on again. So that's like that, because when Paul talks about that, like he's just said there, people kind of sometimes want to train immediately for performance from nothing. But you need a foundation to build upon first, or you need to build that foundation first or rebuild it again. And then you can look at the performance afterwards. But that's when you need to get your nutrition dialed in, because like you can do the things like you've said. I mean, this is my understanding of it, by the way. Tell me if I'm wrong. But you can do the things that you've said, which will get you to a certain level. And then it's like, right, are you happy with that in your life? If you are, yes, perfect. If you want to now start to try to perform better, you need to go back and you need to start again and look at your nutrition again, and then build from there and work out what's happening with your lifestyle, with stress and sleep and all of the other stuff.
I very much think of it as like a skill. Like you're going to have sort of tiers and layers to put on based on the level that you go up in terms of your performance. So if your performance demands are very low, you can do sort of bare minimum, kind of just thinking of portion sizes, food quality. Then as you add another layer in, it's like, okay, perhaps let's focus a little bit more on carbohydrate intake. The next level is like, okay, let's think about sort of carbohydrate periodization throughout the week. Next level then is like, okay, carbohydrate periodization within that day and around that session. And then it's like the next level is like, okay, perhaps let's look at some supplements to help support that then. So like the cherry and icing on top of the cake. So you kind of got all these different levels to go through. Now, we all kind of think that elite athletes would be right banging at the top all the time. But a lot of them, even at the highest levels, like when I start working with them, they're not even doing the basic stuff right. They're like, I am absolutely sort of ruined. I'm so tired. I'm driving home. I'm going to the services and I'm getting whatever, going to McDonald's, KFC. And it's like, okay, I want to be doing all this really cool carbohydrate periodization stuff with you, but I need to get you to eat your vegetables first. It can be like that with some of them. Like even some of the elite kind of rugby players, all they kind of care about is just playing rugby. They just want to smash people on the weekend. That's all they want to do. They don't care about psychology, nutrition, strength and conditioning, even actually going to the gym. They don't really some of them aren't that fond with. They just want to smash people on the weekend. So getting them to sort of buy into your program, your way of thinking, it does take time. And sometimes you have to play this slow game with this. It's like, what's your low hanging fruit? Let's pick that one first, and then let's build it up. So some people are like, right, Chris, my diet's absolutely terrible. Give me a plan. I'll follow it. And I can take someone from literally base all the way up to level 10 in the space of a couple of weeks. Where some of them is like, right, we have to do this as a slow burner approach and really focus on building like these solid habits and foundations that's going to make them adhere to this for a long period of time. So ultimately, that is long-term goal, is make sure any approach is sustainable, whether it is elite athletes or general population. Because even with elite athletes, if I know that they're going to perform at their best at a certain weight, body fat percentage and stuff like that, to improve their power to weight ratio, their robustness, all that kind of stuff, I don't want them to sort of plug hard 4 to 6 weeks in. Off season comes, they undo all their good work and probably even put more back on because they didn't like the approach wasn't sustainable. And then you get into preseason, all of a sudden it's like this old way of thinking is, oh, it's preseason, I'll sort everything out then. And ultimately, if this preseason is 4 to 6 weeks, they're not gonna make any progress there at all.
Yeah.
Yes, they drop a little bit of body fat, but they're not building year to year. So we need to make sure that these habits are really sustainable. And they actually just like what they're doing. It just becomes a part of their life. And as cliche as it sounds, like, it is a lifestyle. So if they could do this for a long enough period of time, year on year, they could just keep on building. And I don't have to have the conversation of like, right, you've done this for 4 to 6 weeks, you've relapsed about 10 weeks, and then we're going to go again. Like, it's not a productive way of doing things. And, you're going to get that with general population as well, this yo-yo dieting, because they haven't found an approach that works for them and that's sustainable for them. Ultimately, whatever level you're at, the principles are the most important thing. Like we mentioned, energy balance, portion sizes and everything. But it's make sure they are happy following and adhering to that they could do it for a long period of time.
Well, that's the thing. I was working with you and I lost 7 kilos over the space of, I don't know, just under 3 months, which I'd probably do if I just crash dieted quite quickly. But what I was always surprised at is how much food I was actually eating. I was eating a lot of volume of food and I never really felt hungry. Nearer the end I did, because I was just getting to that quite lower weight and I was, it was time to go into a maintenance phase. But I was just, certainly in the first month or two, I was just like, God, I'm just eating all the time. I was eating loads and I was always used to hardly eating anything when I was dieting, in inverted commas. And that was what made it sustainable. And that's why I don't have any trouble now maintaining it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's probably a little bit of bias towards sports nutrition helping you there, in terms of even though you're in a calorie deficit, there's a small calorie deficit. We're still having a lot of carbohydrates, which then is going to offer a lot of food volume, a lot of fiber, and that's just going to be far more satiating as well. And I think just looking at sort of rates of fat loss between general population and athletes have to be far more conservative with how quickly they drop body fat and the degree of their calorie deficit. Generally speaking, the bigger the calorie deficit, the bigger the compromise, the bigger the trade-off. And this is in terms of both physical and mental performance, recovery, energy levels, daily freshness, fatigue, food focus, is desire to eat, immune disturbances, fragmented sleep, you kind of name it. Essentially, whenever we pull calories down too aggressively, you're going to experience all of these far too much. So if you say general population, you can sit in a big calorie deficit, not really experience too many trade-offs, other than perhaps food focus being a little bit higher, being a little bit more tired. But if you're an elite athlete and you have to go into a training session and be fully switched on and essentially impress everyone to earn your spot in the team, you can't have these compromises and trade-offs. And therefore the fat loss approach has to be far more methodical and slower, so they can still be in a small calorie deficit, still make progress, but still, complement and preserve their performance to the best of their ability. Like if sort of elite athletes drop the calories too aggressively, deplete the carbohydrates too much, then their performance is going to tank. And then the coach is like, why is he not performing well? Okay, he's underperforming. He's not going to get selected for the weekend. So there is far more sort of emphasis on the degree of fat loss and doing things a little bit more methodical. Not saying that general population shouldn't do things methodically, but they can go a little bit more aggressively if they needed to. So I found when I work with athletes, about 1% loss in body weight via body fat per week is the right kind of approach to go into the rate of fat loss. With general population, they can probably push out a little bit more aggressively, maybe 2.5% per week, especially with individuals with higher body fat percentages as well.
Did it surprise you I was just thinking about this when you were talking about working with elite athletes and kind of like having to convince them that nutrition's all right and mindset's all right and all of that sort of stuff, because you'd think, and did this surprise you in the beginning? Because a lot of trainers will get this as well, right? Because trainers, you do your level 3 and then you're like, right, I'm ready. And then you're like, right, I want to go and train athletes now. And then it's like, actually, oh no, I've got to train anybody. Like you just said, you came out of university and it was like, I'll work with anybody because I have to. And then you want to get into that. And then you think, once I get into training athletes or doing like nutrition for athletes and all of that, it'll be dead easy because they'll be all over it and they'll really want to do it. And then it's actually like, you get there and you're like, they're just as hard, or sometimes harder, because like you think they'd be all over it, but they're not. Because like you said, they just want to go and smash people on a Saturday and that's it. So did that surprise you in the beginning? Was it like quite, not demoralizing, but was it like, oh, blimey, maybe I should rethink what I'm going to do here?
It's definitely interesting for sure. Like my first club I got to was Hull KR, which was a rugby league super league team, and same sort of thing. Like they just want to smash people on the weekend. You're going to get some individuals that, yes, really want to sort of exploit every area, so they are at their best of their ability every single week and every single day in the training. Whereas some of them are just like they've never even thought about this before, and then you got some guy they don't know coming in telling them that they need to eat differently, live a different kind of way. So the biggest thing for me is just my ability to communicate this across them effectively. And is this relationship, this buy-in with them as well, is like, okay, this guy wants me to completely change how I eat, drink, and live my life. I don't even know him. Do I even trust him? So for me, it's like, right, I need to get them on side, get to communicate with them, and then just build on it from there and in. But yeah, when I first got in, I was like, I know straight out of university, I know loads textbook-wise, academic-wise, I'm pretty good. And it's like, I know their true potential, but they didn't see it. So I just need to make sure they are educated and bring them up to speed. And that's a slow process for sure, like building them up to speed through education. And then ultimately the end goal is making them autonomous so they can, be self-sufficient with their own nutrition plan and their lifestyle and everything. So that's where we want to ultimately get to for sure.
I just wondered, I had a question, Chris, from a member earlier when I said I was doing the podcast today and I was going to be talking to you. And I don't know if this is sort of in your lane or such, because I'd imagine the kind of the high level athletes that you work with, I'd imagine they're probably more like in their 20s and 30s, maybe touching a little bit older. But would you know about, women who are maybe coming up to menopause and that sort of thing, if their nutrition should change for training? Or, I mean, is that an area you've ever touched on with what you do, or is that something that's not something you deal with generally?
Not necessarily something I would typically come across, but the way I kind of see, it's quite a crude approach, and Paul knows it all too well, in terms of whether a plan is working or not. I just use a really simple, straightforward traffic light system, just scale things or rate things on a scale of 1 to 10. So green being anything 8, 9, 10 out of 10. So if you're scoring the green with those potential compromises, recovery, performance, daily freshness, food focus, energy fatigue, all that kind of stuff. If you're scoring 8, 9, 10 out of 10, your diet's probably pretty good. Your nutrition quality is pretty good. If you're sort of 5, 6, 7, this amber, it's okay, but it's not great. That being said, it's not terrible either. So you're doing some things right, but it's not perfect yet. If you're below a 5, 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 10, there's something clearly wrong. And that's where we need to look into things in far more detail. So if I have someone that approaches me and they're like, okay, I'm scoring, 1, 2, 3, or 4 out of 10 in any of those areas, it's like, okay, we really need to look at this because it shouldn't be like this. And then we just need to do a little bit of a needs analysis, like what is the limiting factor here and what we need to fix to get you moving in the right direction, to get you from a 4 to a 5 to a 6 to a 10. So if, for example, say a client came to me, a female client going into sort of menopause and stuff, I would do the same kind of thing. How are we feeling on this kind of rating, albeit being a little bit crude, but this is what I can directly affect from a performance nutrition perspective. So if everything's scoring well, it's like, okay, probably nutrition, performance nutrition is in the right direction for sure. If it's not, and you're kind of scoring out 1 to 4, what we need to do then? Can I help you? Do I need to refer out for more of a clinical based nutritionist then? So
I like this. This is good because often people say, oh, have a bit of this, have a bit of that, have this supplement here, try a bit of this magic dust or whatever. But actually, I kind of like these KPIs are kind of calls to action. They say, right, okay, where are you on this scale? Now we need to act upon something in order to change this. And I think that's a very intuitive way of doing things because, then you can individualize that person and you can make changes and act upon them rather than just recommend a supplement or rather than just recommend something off the top of your head. You're working on the individual data from that person, which I think is a really good approach.
Yeah, absolutely. It just makes the decision-making process far clearer and makes you far more aware of what to look out for and how to like self-monitor it. So if you just check in with yourself on a daily basis, how's my performance today? Okay, it's about a 7 out of 10. Okay, what could have caused you to be a 7 out of 10 instead of a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10? Is it sleep quality? Is it stress levels? Is it carbohydrate intake? Is it hydration? Is it your own mental preparation? Did a client piss you off or something? And that's playing on your mind. All those little things, you know? So you can always kind of just pull things out and really sort of, again, do a needs analysis. I always say for every issue, there's an intervention. Once we know what the issue is, and I know what all the potential interventions are, i.e. the toolbox we can use, then it just makes the whole system far more effective. It's like, okay, if muscle soreness is really high, what caused this? Was that a spike in training load? Was that a novel training stimulus? Or was just the fact that you've been in too much of a calorie deficit? Is the case your protein's not high enough? You're not sleeping well? What kind of things lead to this? And you can really kind of just start pinpointing things out, extracting it, and then put a plan of action in place to make sure you are moving in the right direction. Because elite athletes, when they're performing optimally, they should be scoring 8, 9, 10 out of 10 for everything on those KPIs, those key performance indicators. If they're not, it's like, then we start asking questions. Why is that? How can we then get them up to this 8, 9, 10?
I love that, because I do that with my guys, like a similar sort of thing. Like you said, it's a crude way of doing it. We call it the weekly battle plan. And basically, they just have to mark themselves every day, not even out of 10, just a tick. Did you get enough sleep? Did you do some mobility? Did you do some exercise, which isn't necessarily every day, but like it could just be going for a walk or whatever. You know, what did you eat well that day? You know, because then the next day they might be like, oh, I'm really tired, and that. It's like, well, look at your scores from yesterday. Oh, I didn't eat very well. Well, there you go then. So, because most people go like, most people, I shouldn't say, but some people go through life, and I used to do it, and you'd be like, I'm tired all the time, and you can't work out why. And it's staring you in the face. If you just track what you've done over the last week, you'll go, well, of course I am. That's obvious, isn't it? There's why I am. And so I love that. Like you say, it's a very crude way, but for people starting out, it's something that they're probably not doing anyway. So you might as well start doing that. And then at least you can start to pinpoint what you need to focus on. And it's probably, most people come to us for exercise, don't they? But it's probably, you know, if it's not that, it could be nutrition. It could be sleep. It could be stress at work. It could be anything lifestyle, like oriented. So I use that as in the very beginning. We use it as we go ahead. And then what you can say is, right, what's the worst thing? And like someone might be getting like really bad sleep, 4 hours kip a night or something. It's like, right, we need to focus on that. So that's the one thing we need to focus on next week. But then it's like, well, what's causing that? Is it your nutrition? Is it your stress? Whatever. Dial into that. And then it's like, right, that's the one thing we need to focus on. You know, because people think the thing they need to focus on is like, oh, I just need to do more exercise. And it's like, okay, you can, but that's going to add to the problem.
So I 100% agree with that. Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I think it might be interesting, just given the time we've had. I mean, the thing is, Chris, I could ask you so many questions. I mean, Chris has got a really good resource on his website that just answers loads and loads of questions. And I've actually posted a few of them in my own Transformation Club group, which is my clients, because I think a lot of them are, I suppose it's what I thought might be quite good to finish on is busting a few myths, because there's a few things that you've written about which have been really useful for my clients, which are, for example, around like weight. I've gained weight overnight. I've gained a couple of pounds, and also the value of exercise in weight maintenance as well. And you've written quite extensively, really clearly as well on that. But I just thought I'd get you to bust a few myths before we finish, which is how much of a contributor is exercise to weight loss in terms of calorie expenditure? And how should people start thinking about their diet in terms of the way their exercise interacts with their food intake?
So exercise certainly improves fat loss for sure, purely because you're going to be expending energy, but most likely not as much as you think it would.
How many calories for a session, for example?
If they're doing, just say you have like a general sort of guy going to the gym, weighs 80 kilos, say, for example, does his general sort of like bodybuilding bro kind of split, chest and Monday, all that kind of stuff. Top end in that session, he's burning about sort of 240 calories per hour. Realistically, like, is not significant. So if you think like, oh, I'm just going to eat well, go to the gym, yes, they are fantastic things to focus on, but you probably need to focus on the amount of food you eat as well. So food quality is great, but portion sizes are equally as great. So, you know, like, it's far easier for many individuals just to restrict calories by perhaps 500 instead of burning that amount of 500 calories to create that calorie deficit. So yes, energy expenditure does play a role. So should we say energy expenditure via exercise does play a role, but not as big as you think if you really want to move the needle with fat loss, 100%. A big thing that a lot of individuals forget about is just their activity levels outside of training, and that makes a massive impact in terms of the need to non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is your step counts essentially. So I will give 75% of my sort of online clients, even if they are competing at higher levels, to track the steps via a water pedometer or something like that. Just because we know, for example, if you restrict calories, you do get compensations in NEAT, i.e. your body just trying to slow you down a little bit to preserve this energy. And if you were even like a high level athlete and you're doing 3 sessions a day, if you combine that with a slight calorie deficit, they're going to be pretty tired and therefore become, or should we say, just go into sloth mode where they're on the sofa, they're watching Netflix for 10 hours a day then. So the overall expenditure isn't anywhere near as high as you think it is. But if they got up, they just did some low level activity, walking, playing golf, something like that, they can burn a lot more energy that way for sure. So essentially, we're just trying to, when we think of fat loss, is really 3 kind of corners. So yes, your calorie intake, but that goes against the calories you expend in training versus the calories you expend outside of training as well. In training, you don't really burn that much unless you're sport-specific stuff. But the calories you expend outside of training can be huge. And I always say like 10,000 as just a minimum, almost like as a daily non-negotiable. It's more of a tick box exercise. If you do that, you know that you've been highly active outside of what you do on a daily basis. So that plays a massive bearing on it.
Fantastic. And then I suppose my final myth is I've gained weight overnight. I put on 2 pounds. It's it's all going wrong. And you've basically kind of myth busted that in really interesting detail in some of your articles. But tell me why people might be putting on weight quickly, say over a couple of days or a week or even overnight. What tends to be the main contributor?
Well, first of all, like during the duration of this podcast, I've drank about 500 ml of fluid. That's 0.5 kilos. That's just over a pound. I'm now a pound heavier by sitting on my ass the last hour. So when you sort of look at the scale weight, is so that if you look at the scale weight as an indication of progress solely, it's not accurate at all. I like using scale weight as one thing to measure as a data point that complements others. So we know that your body weight is going to fluctuate massively on a daily basis from the amount of food you've consumed, the amount of food you consumed, the type of food you consumed, sodium intake, muscle soreness, stress levels, time of weighing, all these kind of things. What kind of absolutely ruins me is when people weigh themselves before and after a gym session and they notice that they've lost 600 grams or 600 ml of fluid and they think it's body fat. It's like, no, you just sweated a little bit. So many factors and just elements goes into sort of body weight fluctuations. We can't solely look at this as a measurement of progress. Body weight is cool if you really take a few data points, zoom out and look at the trends over time. That's when it can paint a little bit more of a picture. But if you're just looking at it on a daily basis, and if you're weighing in at irregular times, you're going to see it go up, down, up, down. It's going to drive you absolutely crazy.
Well, I gained about 2 kilos after going into surgery. And I think it's mainly because I've been training so hard up to that. And then all of a sudden, I started just continuing to eat well. And you told me about refilling glycogen supplies and things like that, and that having an effect on weight.
Yeah, 100%. Even if you had like a small like inflammatory response after surgery, that's going to retain water as well. Like my food choices today, I've gone for like a kilogram of potato today because, well, I can. So I'm just going to be weighing a lot heavier tomorrow when I weigh in, even if it's at exactly the same time, because I just had a lot of food volume today. So loads of things kind of can impact this. So yes, we can look at weight. Ideally, if you can weigh yourself multiple times a week, you see a better trend over time. But there's definitely pros and cons to weighing yourself. So if you can jump on the scales and look at the number objectively, it's like, okay, I'm 80 kilo today, 80.2 today, 79 kilo today. That's cool. Like, that's just good data. We can sort of record that and then just crack on. But if you jump on a scale and that affects you emotionally, and then that affects your eating habits and your lifestyle behaviors after, then we don't weigh.
Mm-hmm.
That's my sort of hard and fast kind of rule with that, just based on experience when I've had or seen individuals sort of weighing, target kind of females more specifically here. They're weighing, it's like, okay, I'm heavy today. I'm just going to starve myself. I'm not going to eat anything. They weigh in the next day, like, oh, nice, I've lost a kilo, sweet. And then they're like, you know what, I'm going to treat myself. I've done well. And then they pile in loads of food. The next day, it's like, shit, I've just gained 1.5 kilos. Oh, it looks like I'm not eating today. And that is just a vicious cycle. For them, the scale is the worst thing they can do, because for some reason that scale weight affects their overall, self-worth. It shouldn't be that way. So if I have some clients I work with, even if they are higher level, if they don't have to be a specific weight, I don't get them to weigh themselves at all. Because
unless they're a fighter or something like that, then
absolutely, yeah, 100%. We can just go off of the markers, like how your clothes fit you, how you feel in your own skin, what your measurement's saying, eye circumferences, or if you got access to body fats, or like methods, skin folds, all that kind of stuff. Then you can look at it from that perspective. But generally speaking, I don't necessarily weigh individuals who get emotionally attached to the numbers on the scales. Like, it's just not worth it at all. But some individuals, they could jump on the scale, see what the weight is, make a record of it. We get a nice weekly average, and that paints a picture over time. So yeah, that's my kind of thought process on that.
It's great.
Pardon the pun, but that would be feeding the problem, wouldn't it?
I mean, Chris, you said that, what is it, in a pound of fat, there's 3,500 calories. So, you would have had to have consumed quite a lot of food to put on a pound of fat overnight.
Like, if the maths doesn't add up, it doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Like if you put a pound on the next day, did you eat 3,500 calories in excess that day? So you've had a full day of eating and eating 3,500 calories on top of that day. If you did, maybe it is a pound of body fat. But if you didn't, i.e. the equivalent of a large Domino's pizzas and half a tub of Ben & Jerry's in excess, is actually body fat, or is it just perhaps just holding a little bit of water, a bit of food in your gut? There's a lot of things that can affect it. So yeah, we cannot be overly reactive to the scale weight for sure.
Well, I mean, you've got me eating around about 3,800, give or take, depending on the day, calories a day, 3,800, give or take. And I can't imagine eating double that, that'd be insane. It'd have to be liquidized fat, basically. Which, because I feel like I eat
a block of butter.
Yeah, block of butter. I mean, that's the one thing I do miss, is a lot of butter, because I think I did eat probably close to a block of butter before I worked with Chris on some bread. But anyway, look, I mean, Chris, this has been amazing. Before we kind of wrap up, James, do you have any other questions you'd like to ask Chris, or kind of any thoughts on anything?
No, probably the main question would be, can you come on again at some stage in the future? We can talk again, because I think, like you said, there's so much that we can cover, and there's so many questions that we've got. Potentially, I think it'd be a good idea to maybe for us to get questions from our members and clients and things, and maybe do a Q&A session or something with Chris in the future would be really, really helpful. So no, thank you, Chris. It's been superb.
No,
yeah, we're going to scratch.
I think that'd be really cool. Yeah, like a Q&A session, that'd be fantastic. I'll be up for that for sure. Wicked.
Peter, what about yourself? Any questions or anything?
No, I haven't. Same as James. Just like, pretty much everyone we speak to, it's really good, because it's just great, because you get an insight, and then you get an insight into the fact that there's so much more behind everything. But for most people, it's just start with the very basics. Don't get overcomplicated, especially with nutrition as well. Just start with the very basics and go from there. And then you can start to listen to this again and listen to what Chris has been saying. And then you might start to understand some of the other stuff that he's been going on about. So yeah, I just think that's great. So we'll invite questions from listeners and everybody, and see what we can come up with, and then hopefully put another show together. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, I think.
So thank you, Chris.
It's really interesting to hear that, doesn't matter what level you are, whether you're an elite athlete or a total beginner, you've got to focus on the basics, because it won't just carry you through to where you want to be. You've got to plan, you've got to think about where you want to go, and you've got to have a route to it. Great thing about working with Chris is that Chris has a very clear idea of where to go. And it's often why people work with a coach, whether it's a fat loss coach or performance-based coach. There is a path to follow, and you just need to walk it. And sometimes the job is to get people to realize that they can walk it, and that it will be a fruitful endeavor, and they'll get the result that they want. And certainly that's what Chris has done for me. He's done a great job. So, and it reminds me of something my rugby coach used to tell me when I was a teenager, and I used to play quite a bit before I suddenly realized I just wasn't as big as the rest of the lads. They were huge. Was good hands, which is, if you can't hold the ball, if you can't catch the ball from someone else, it doesn't matter how intricate your gameplay is or how good you are a runner. If you can't catch that ball, if you don't have good hands, it doesn't work. And it's the same with diet. If you don't have the good hands, if you're not doing the basics, you're not going to see the result. So, Chris, I was wondering if you've got any words to leave people with, or any thoughts that you think people should take away with. I know it's putting you on the spot, but
no. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of the basics. It really, really is like everything we do is just very much principle based. There's no fancy bells and whistles that's going to accelerate your performance, your recovery, anything like that. If you think of like that jar analogy and the big rocks and small rocks and adding in the sand, is that whole kind of approach. Like, what are the big rocks we need to look at? Total calorie intake, food quality. What's the smaller sort of rocks then? Okay, perhaps carbohydrate intake, carbohydrate timing. What's the sand? Okay, protein thresholds with each meal, accelerating recovery with carbohydrate timing, all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely layers to it for sure. And if you're focusing and spend so much time, effort, and money focus on the supplements, the sand, when you don't have the big rocks in place, you're not going to hit your true potential. And everything we're doing from a performance nutrition perspective is trying to make them make sure that it isn't a limiting factor to their performance. So you mentioned that having good hands, if they're super fatigued 60, 70 minutes in, their concentration is going to go down, and they're going to have pretty piss poor hands, aren't they? Their passing accuracy and speed is going to go down. So everything we're doing needs to have a performance outcome, and you need to be able to make sure it relates to performance outcomes on the field. That is, or whatever kind of sport endeavor they have. So that's been really, really important.
Great. So where can people find more information about you, and potentially if they wanted to work with you, if they've got a performance-based goal, what's the best way to get hold of you?
Instagram is probably the best way to get hold of me. So my handle is @ChrisLoweNutrition. So I'm quite active on there, posting quite frequently on stories and on my feed as well. Also have a podcast called the Average to Elite Podcast, where I look at different avenues from both the nutrition, the strength and conditioning, the psychological, all that kind of stuff, to take any element of your performance from average to elite. So I'm 24 episodes in now. Started at the beginning of the first lockdown, so that's going quite nicely. And then finally, my website is chrislowenutrition.com, and then you're going to see a huge, over 150 blog articles and stuff in there surrounding every single area of performance-based nutrition, and more information how you can work with myself through my athlete coaching program and so on.
Great, fantastic. Well, look, it's a pleasure working with you and my own goals, and it's a pleasure having you here talking to us, and we look forward to having you back. So that was Chris Lowe, guys. Thanks for listening to the Health Oddity podcast, episode 14. Next week, we're going to come to you with, who's the guest next week? Do you know, Peter?
It's Little Tank, Kirsten. She's awesome.
I've not met her, and I'm looking forward to it. And then we'll be coming up to Christmas, and we'll be talking all things healthy around Christmas. We're going to ruin your Christmas with lots of health advice. But thanks for listening.
We're not ruining Christmas, mate. We know who. Yeah, never mind.
Okay, so thanks for listening, and please do subscribe. It helps us out. And take care, guys.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favourite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Oddity.